Greetings, greetings. Hello, good morning. I'm John Smith. Are you Beer Jones? Yes, I am. How are you? Fine, thanks. How's is Helen? She's very well, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Green. Good morning, Mrs. Brown. How are you this evening? Good night, John. Goodbye, Beer. See you tomorrow. Intonation. Hello, good morning, I'm John Smith. Are you Bill Jones? Yes, I am. How are you? Fine, thanks. How's is Helen? She's very well, thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Green. Good evening, Mrs. Brown. How are you this evening? Good night, John. Goodbye, Beer. See you tomorrow. Questions and answer. Preguntas y respuestas. Hello, Beer. How are you? Fine, thanks. How are you this evening? Very well, thank you. How are you this afternoon? Fine, thanks. How are you? Are you Beer Jones? Yes, I am. Are you Helen John? Yes, I am. Good night, Beer. Good night, John. Goodbye, Mrs. Brown. Goodbye, Mr. Green. Good afternoon, Beer. How are you? Good afternoon, Mr. Green. I'm very well, thank you. I'm John Smith. I'm John Smith. Are you Beer John? Yes, I am. Good night, Mr. Green. See you tomorrow, Mrs. Brown. Good night. Hello. How are you? Fine. See you tomorrow. Fine. Good morning, Beer. How's is Helen? How's is Helen? She's fine, thank you. How is Mr. Brown this evening? How is Mr. Brown this evening? Mr. Brown is very well, thank you. Goodbye, Helen. See you tomorrow morning. Goodbye, Helen. See you tomorrow morning. Goodbye, Mrs. Brown. See you tomorrow. Substitution drill. Práctica oral. Hello, John. Hello, Beer. Hello, Mrs. Brown. Hello, Mr. Green. How are you? Fine, thank you. Fine, thank you. Just fine, thank you. Very well, thank you. Pretty well, thank you. I'm fine, thank you. I'm very well, thank you. How are you this evening? How are you this morning? How are you this afternoon? How are you today, Beer? Goodbye. See you tomorrow. Goodbye. See you this afternoon. Goodbye. See you this evening. Goodbye. See you tonight. Goodbye. See you later. Goodbye. See you later. I'm John Smith. I'm Mr. Green. I'm Mrs. Brown. I'm Helen Jones. How's Helen? How's Beer? How's Mrs. Brown? How's Mr. Green? Helen is very well, thank you. John is very well, thank you. Mrs. Brown is very well, thank you. Mr. Green is very well, thank you. Are you Mr. Green? Are you Mrs. Brown? Are you Beer? Are you Helen? Yes, I am. I'm Mrs. Green. Yes, I am. I'm Mr. Green. Yes, I am. I'm Mrs. Brown. Yes, I am. I'm John Smith. Yes, I am. I'm Beer Jones. Goodbye, John. See you tomorrow. Good night, John. See you tomorrow. How's his Beer? How's his Helen? How's his Mr. Green? Are you? Are you Beer and Helen? Are you Mr. and Mrs. Brown? She is very well, thank you. Helen is very well, thank you. He is very well, thank you. Beer is very well, thank you. I am very well, thank you. Beer and Helen are very well, thank you. Mr. and Mrs. Brown are very well, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Green. How are Beer and John? Good afternoon, Mr. Green. How are you? Good afternoon, Mr. Green. How is Mrs. Green? How is Helen? How is Beer? Hello, Beer. How are you? Hi, Beer. How are you? Goodbye, Beer. Goodbye, Jean. Goodbye, Ed. Goodbye, Jack. Goodbye, Betty. Goodbye, Martha. See you tomorrow. See you tomorrow. See you tomorrow. See you tomorrow. Hello, I'm Beer. Good morning, John. How are you? 5 tens. How's his Helen? She's very well, thank you. Goodbye, Beer. Goodbye, John. Good morning, Mrs. Brown. Good morning, Helen. How are you this morning, Mrs. Brown? I'm very well, thank you. How are you? 5 tens. How's his Brown? Mr. Brown? Mr. Brown is fine, thank you. 5 tens. How's his Mr. Brown? Mr. Brown is fine, thank you. Goodbye, Mrs. Brown. Goodbye, Helen. See you tomorrow. Good evening. Good evening. I'm Jack Smith. I'm Beer John. How are you? Very well, thanks. And you? And you? And you? Just fine, thank you. Goodbye. Hello, John. How are you? Hi, Beer. Pretty well, thanks. How's his Martha? Is she's well? She's very well, thanks. See you later, John. Goodbye. Fine. See you this evening. See you this evening. See you this evening. See you this evening. Good morning, Mrs. Brown. How are you? Good morning, Mrs. Brown. How are you? Very well, thank you, Mr. Green. Is Mr. Brown where this morning? Where this morning? Where this morning? Mr. Brown is very well, thank you. Are Beer and Helen where this morning? Beer and Helen are fine, thank you. See you tomorrow afternoon. See you tomorrow afternoon. See you tomorrow afternoon. See you tomorrow afternoon. Goodbye. See you tomorrow, Mr. Green. Goodbye. Hi, well, hi, how are you? 5 tens, I'm Beer Joms. Hello, Beer. And you are? And you are? And you are? On Egg White. Hello, Ed. See you later. Goodbye. See you later. Goodbye. Good morning, Mrs. Brown. How are you? I'm just fine. I'm just fine. Thanks. Are you well, Mrs. Green? I'm very well, thanks. How's is Mr. Brown? Just fine. Thanks. See you tonight, Mr. Green. See you tonight, Mrs. Brown. Goodbye, Mrs. Green. I'm John Smith. Are you Bill Jones? Yes, I am. How are you? 5 tens. Are you well this morning? Yes, I am. And Helen. Is Helen well? Yes, she is. Helen and I are fine this morning. Yes, she is. Helen and I are fine this morning. Is Helen well? Yes, she is. Helen and I are fine this morning. See you tomorrow, Bill. Goodbye, John. Exercise. Ejercicios. Lo correcto es que escriba cada conversación, la pase del libro a la mascota. Afternoon, tarde. En, y. Evening, noche. Fine, bien. He, él. How, cómo. How's, cómo es. I, yo. I'm, soy o estoy. Just, justo, solo. Later, later. Después, más tarde. Morning, mañana. Mr., señor. Mrs., señora. Pretty, muy bien, muy bonito. She, ella. She's, ella está, ella es. This, esto, eso. Esto, esta. Today, hoy. Am, verbo cero estar. Are, verbo cero estar. Is, verbo cero estar. See, el verbo ver. Recuerden que el verbo cero estar son 3 partes. Am, que se utiliza con I am. Are, que se utiliza con we are, you are, they are. Is, que se utiliza con he is, she is, it is. El verbo ser o estar. Good afternoon, buenas tardes. Goodbye, adiós. Good evening, buenas noches. Good morning, buenos días. Good night, buenas noches, pero cuando ya uno se va de la casa. Good evening, buenas noches, pero cuando uno llega a la casa. Hello, hola. Hi, hola. Thanks, gracias. Thank you, gracias a ti. Nombres, names. Betty, Beer, Brown, Ed, Green, Helen, Jack, Jean, John, Jones, Martha, Schmidt, Schmidt.